Ayanda lived in the busy heart of Lagos, Nigeria. She was a woman who worked hard and valued every coin she earned. With the inheritance she got from her late father, she bought a house and put her heart into renovating it. She believed she was building not just a home but also a future with her husband, Chike. To everyone around them, they looked like a perfect couple. Chike was handsome, charming, and always full of words that made people laugh. But behind the charm, he was careless with money. He loved risky business ideas, quick money plans, and often left Ayanda to cover the real expenses that kept their lives moving. Ayanda quietly carried most of the weight. She paid the bills, kept the home running, and even supported Chike's family without complaining. Yet, instead of gratitude, she was met with pride and arrogance. Chike started staying out late, coming home with the smell of alcohol and the ego of a man who claimed, "A man is the head of the home." His mother, Mama Nkechi, made things worse. She never missed a chance to criticize Ayanda, accusing her of not respecting her son enough, even though Ayanda gave more than she ever received. One stormy evening, everything broke apart. In front of Mama Nkechi and his brothers, Chike shouted at Ayanda, calling her useless and a burden. His voice thundered louder than the rain outside. Before she could defend herself, he dragged her suitcase, threw it into the storm, and locked the door behind her. Humiliated, drenched, and heartbroken, Ayanda walked away without a fight. She went to her cousin Ifeoma's house, where she was reminded that the house deed carried her name. It was her strength, her proof, her key. The next day, while Chike laughed with friends and celebrated his freedom, Ayanda's lawyer sent an eviction notice. When Chike discovered the truth, his pride crumbled. He had never known the house belonged to her. Within days, gossip spread, and neighbors whispered about the man who kicked out the real owner. His family turned against him, and his lover disappeared when things grew hard. On the seventh day, Ayanda returned, not in anger but with quiet strength. With security by her side, she reclaimed her home while Chike begged. She told him calmly that the house only sheltered those who respected it. Watching him carry his belongings into the street, humiliated, was the final closure. Months later, Ayanda turned part of the house into rentals for single mothers. Standing tall, she reminded everyone that no one should ever throw you out of what you built with your own hands. Ayanda paid most of the bills in the house, and still sent money to support Chike's family without making noise about it. She carried the weight of the home on her shoulders, but Chike acted as if he was the one providing everything. He spent his evenings outside, staying out late with friends, returning home smelling of drink and pride. Whenever she tried to talk to him, he waved her off and said, "A man is the head of the home." His words cut deeper each time, because Ayanda knew she was the one holding everything together while he chased after his ego. Mama Nkechi added fuel to the fire. She visited often, but instead of showing love, she filled the house with sharp words. She told anyone who listened that Ayanda did not respect her son enough. She looked down on her cooking, her manners, even the way she spoke. Ayanda swallowed the pain in silence, refusing to talk back, but her heart grew heavier with each insult. Behind closed doors, Chike never defended her. He stood by his mother, nodding while Ayanda's sacrifices went unseen. The tension inside the house became unbearable. Ayanda worked hard all day only to return to coldness and blame. Chike started dressing sharply and staying out even later, ignoring her questions. Neighbors whispered when they saw him with strange women, but he denied everything with arrogance. At night, when Ayanda sat alone in the quiet house, she wondered if love was supposed to feel this heavy. Still, she prayed for change, hoping her patience would open his eyes. Instead, his pride grew. He boasted to his friends about being in control, while Ayanda's quiet strength was ignored. Mama Nkechi repeated her favorite line, "Respect is what keeps a marriage," but what she meant was obedience, not partnership. Ayanda felt her voice shrinking in her own home, her kindness treated like weakness. The gap between them widened. Chike carried himself like a king, yet it was Ayanda's sacrifices that kept the lights on and food on the table. She lived each day with a smile for the world, but inside she was breaking. The love she had poured into her marriage was now a burden she carried alone, while her husband and his mother watched without care. The storm inside the home was only beginning, and Ayanda's silence was the only thing holding it together. One stormy evening, the house was filled with loud voices that rose above the sound of thunder. Chike stood in the middle of the sitting room, his face twisted with anger, pointing at Ayanda as if she was a stranger in her own home. His words cut deep when he called her useless and a burden. Ayanda's heart sank, not because it was the first time he had spoken harshly, but because he shouted it in front of his mother and brothers who sat watching, nodding as if they agreed with him. The rain outside beat hard against the windows, but the storm inside the house was stronger. Mama Nkechi sat with folded arms, a cold look of triumph on her face, while Chike's brothers smirked, enjoying her humiliation. Ayanda stood quietly, tears welling in her eyes, unable to understand how the man she built her life with could treat her like an enemy. Her silence only fueled his rage. He yelled louder, his voice shaking the walls, commanding her to leave his house immediately. Before Ayanda could even gather her strength to respond, Chike grabbed her suitcase, dragged it to the door, and flung it into the pouring rain. The sound of the suitcase hitting the wet ground echoed through the night, mixing with the thunder above. Ayanda's clothes spilled into the mud, drenched within seconds. Chike then slammed the door shut, turned the key, and locked it without looking back. Ayanda stood outside, her hair and dress soaked, her hands trembling, her body shivering from both the cold rain and the deep pain of betrayal. The neighbors peeked from their windows, whispering as they watched her stand abandoned in the storm. For a moment, time seemed frozen. She had given her heart, her money, and her strength to this home. Yet she was being cast out like she was nothing. With slow steps, she bent down, picked up her muddy suitcase, and walked away into the night. She did not scream, she did not beg, she did not fight back. Her quiet dignity was louder than his shouting. Each raindrop on her face mixed with her tears, but her silence carried the weight of her broken heart. That night marked the deepest wound, but also the beginning of a strength she had not yet discovered. Ayanda walked away quietly, her steps heavy, her clothes soaked, and her heart shattered. The rain covered her tears, but inside she felt the sharp sting of betrayal. She had been thrown out of the very home she built, yet she did not turn back or argue. Her silence spoke louder than any words could. With each step into the night, she carried nothing but pain and the small suitcase he had tossed into the mud. She made her way through the dark, wet streets of Lagos until she reached the home of her cousin Ifeoma. When Ifeoma opened the door and saw Ayanda standing there drenched and trembling, she pulled her inside without a word. Warmth and comfort surrounded her, but Ayanda could not stop the flood of emotions. She sat quietly, staring at the floor, replaying every cruel word Chike had shouted at her. Ifeoma held her hand, letting her cry until no more tears could come. The next morning, with the rain now gone, Ifeoma sat her down and reminded her of the truth. She spoke gently but firmly, telling Ayanda that she was stronger than she believed. "You hold the deed," she said with steady eyes. "Don't let them destroy you." Those words lit a spark inside Ayanda. The house that Chike claimed as his was, in truth, hers. She had bought it with her inheritance, she had paid for the renovations, and her name was written on the papers. Ayanda listened, her heart slowly lifting from the ashes of despair. She realized she had allowed their voices to drown out her worth for too long. That night of humiliation had broken something, but it had also uncovered her hidden strength. She began to think clearly, no longer as a woman cast out, but as the rightful owner who had been disrespected. Ifeoma encouraged her to take action, reminding her that silence was not weakness but power waiting to be used at the right time. Ayanda wiped her face, stood taller, and for the first time since the stormy night, she felt a quiet fire rising within her. She knew this was not the end of her story, but the beginning of her fight for dignity. With her cousin by her side, she started planning her next move, one that would change everything. The next morning, while the memory of the storm still lingered in the air, Chike gathered his friends in the house, and threw what he proudly called a celebration. Music played loudly, bottles of drink filled the table, and laughter echoed through the rooms. He mocked Ayanda's quiet exit, telling his friends that he had finally removed a burden from his life. With pride swelling in his chest, he raised his glass and declared that he was now free to live as he pleased. As the drinks flowed, Chike's boasting grew bolder. He told them about Zara, the woman he had secretly been seeing. He bragged that nothing stood in his way anymore, that soon she would become his wife, and together they would rule the home he claimed as his. His friends cheered, slapping his back, feeding his ego even more. Mama Nkechi watched with approval, her smile wide as she believed her son had taken control of his destiny. But while he celebrated, Ayanda was already moving silently, guided by the strength she found with Ifeoma's encouragement. Her lawyer prepared the papers, ensuring every detail was clear and legal. By the time Chaik was still enjoying his false victory, the law was already at work on Ayanda's behalf. The following day, when the noise of the party had settled, Chaik was handed a letter. He tore it open casually, expecting good news, but his face changed the moment his eyes scanned the words. It was an eviction notice, signed and sealed by Ayanda's lawyer. The bold letters declared that the house was not his, and he and his family had 7 days to vacate. Chaik's hand trembled as he read it again, disbelief washing over him. He shouted in anger, demanding an explanation, but the paper in his hand did not lie. His friends, who had cheered with him the day before, exchanged uneasy glances, no longer laughing. The pride he displayed so loudly now turned into panic. The house he had boasted about was never his. Ayanda's name stood firm on the deed, her silent strength speaking louder than his arrogance. What he thought was his greatest victory had suddenly turned into the beginning of his downfall. The man who mocked his wife was about to face the truth he could no longer hide from anyone. Chaik stormed into the lawyer's office with anger burning in his eyes. His voice filled the room as he slammed the eviction notice on the table, demanding answers. He shouted that the house belonged to him, that no one had the right to throw him out. The lawyer remained calm, opening a file and sliding a document across the table. Chaik leaned forward, and his eyes fell on the deed. Written clearly in bold letters, was Ayanda's name as the sole owner. His mouth went dry, his voice caught in his throat. He read it again and again, hoping it was some mistake, but the truth stared back at him. The house had been bought and registered in Ayanda's name before their marriage. His pride shattered in that instant. The home he boasted about, the place he had thrown his wife out of, was never his. The lawyer's calm words cut deeper than Ayanda's silence ever had. You have 7 days to vacate. Chaik sank into the chair, his fury turning into shock. He had never asked how the house came to be, never cared to know whose money had built the walls around him. He always assumed it was his right, but now the truth stripped him bare. Mama Nkechi, who had accompanied him, froze in disbelief. Her lips parted, but no words came out. She had stood proudly by her son, insulting Ayanda, treating her as less, but now she realized all along it was Ayanda who held the true power. The lawyer repeated the deadline firmly, his tone leaving no room for argument. 7 days. No more. No less. Chaik clenched his fists, but there was nothing he could do. The law was on Ayanda's side, and every signature on the papers proved it. The office grew heavy with silence, broken only by the sound of the ticking clock. As they walked out, Chaik's steps dragged with shame. His mother followed, her pride swallowed, her head lowered. For the first time, neither of them had words to defend themselves. Outside, people were already whispering. News traveled fast in Lagos, and the story of the man who tried to claim his wife's house had begun to spread. The humiliation had only just begun, and there was no hiding from it now. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood, faster than the wind. Within hours, people gathered outside the house, whispering in groups, shaking their heads, and pointing at the gates. Lagos was a city where nothing stayed hidden for long, and the news of Chaik throwing out his wife only to discover she owned the house became the hottest story on every lip. Women selling food on the street paused to gossip, children ran errands with the tail on their tongues, and even men at local bars laughed about how foolish he had been. Chaik stood inside, peering through the curtains, hearing the murmur of voices outside. Every whisper cut through his pride like a sharp knife. Neighbors who once praised him now mocked his arrogance. They said, "How can a man drive out the very woman who gave him a roof?" The humiliation burned deep in his chest. His proud words about being the head of the home were now being thrown back at him with laughter. The shame did not stop there. His brothers, who had once supported his cruelty, now turned their anger on him. They cornered him in the living room, shouting that he had destroyed everything. "Because of your pride, we are about to lose the only shelter we have," one of them yelled. Another accused him of chasing after women instead of valuing the home Ayanda built. Their voices rose in frustration, their blame heavy and bitter. Mama Nkechi, usually quick with sharp words, sat silently in the corner, her face pale. She could not defend her son, not when the truth was clear. She heard the neighbors' gossip as clearly as everyone else, and each word pierced her pride. Her neighbors, who once looked up to her, now laughed behind her back. The shame spread from her son to her own name. Chike tried to shout back at his brothers, but the strength in his voice was gone. His words fell weak, drowned by their anger and the laughter outside. He felt the walls closing in. The same walls he had claimed as his now slipping from his grasp. His pride, once so loud, had collapsed under the weight of truth. And in the eyes of the community, he was no longer the man he pretended to be, but a fool who lost everything through his own arrogance. On the 7th day, the street outside the house was already full of curious eyes. Neighbors gathered in silence, waiting to see what would happen. The air was heavy with tension, and whispers ran through the crowd like fire. Then, a black car pulled up, and Ayanda stepped out. She was no longer the drenched woman who walked away in the rain. She stood tall, calm, and confident. At her side were uniformed security guards and a court officer holding official documents. The crowd stirred, murmuring in awe at her quiet strength. Chike rushed out of the house the moment he saw her. His proud shoulders had dropped, and his once arrogant voice now trembled. In front of everyone, he stretched out his hands and pleaded, "You are my wife, forgive me. Let us fix this." His words, desperate and shaky, fell flat in the ears of the neighbors who had watched his cruelty only a week before. Ayanda looked at him with steady eyes, her face unreadable. She did not raise her voice, nor did she show anger. Instead, she spoke calmly, her words slicing deeper than any shout could. "This house shelters those who respect it. You did not." Her statement carried through the air, and the neighbors nodded, some even clapping softly, their faces filled with admiration. The court officer stepped forward, handing over the legal papers that confirmed the order. The guard stood firm as the crowd leaned closer, eager to see the end of the drama. Chike's knees buckled, his pride broken before everyone. Mama Nkechi appeared at the doorway, her face pale, her silence louder than all the gossip outside. She could not speak, not when the truth was staring at her. The neighbors watched as Chike begged again, but Ayanda did not waver. Her calm presence was stronger than any storm. She had returned not with anger but with dignity, and that made her power undeniable. The people outside began to whisper her name with respect, calling her a woman of wisdom and strength. As the court officer gave the final notice, the reality settled in. Chike and his family no longer had a place in the house. The same walls they had claimed were about to close behind them forever, and there was nothing their words could change. Chike and his family were forced to drag their belongings out of the house under the sharp gaze of the neighbors. The street was crowded with people watching every move, some whispering, others shaking their heads, and a few laughing at the once proud man who now carried his mattress on his back. Every item they removed felt like another blow to Chike's pride. The neighbors who had seen him boast now saw him broken, and none of them offered a helping hand. Even the children stood at a distance, pointing and giggling as the family stumbled with their scattered things. Mama Nkechi, who once spoke with so much fire, walked quietly behind her sons, carrying a small bag. Her eyes stayed low, unable to meet anyone's stare. Her silence spoke of defeat, and the humiliation weighed heavily on her. The family who once treated Ayanda like nothing was now being stripped of everything, their shame exposed for all to see. Did I in the middle of it all? Zara was nowhere to be found. The woman Chike had loudly declared as his future wife vanished the moment trouble came. She did not return his calls. She did not show up to stand by him, and she did not want to be tied to his disgrace. Her disappearance cut him deeper than the gossip outside. He realized too late that the woman he had risked everything for was never truly his. He stood there abandoned, humiliated, and empty. Ayanda watched silently from a distance as the last of their things were carried out. Her face was calm, her steps measured, her strength clear for everyone to see. She did not shout, she did not laugh, she did not mock him. Instead, she simply waited until the house was free. The neighbors turned their eyes from the street back to her, admiration written across their faces. When the court officer confirmed that the house was now hers alone, Ayanda stepped forward. She walked through the doorway with the grace of someone who knew her worth. The sound of the door closing behind her was soft, but it echoed like thunder in Chike's heart. It was the final blow, the end of his arrogance, and the beginning of her new chapter. Ayanda had returned not with noise, but with quiet dignity that spoke louder than any words ever could. Months later, Ayand's house looked nothing like the place she was once thrown out of. Fresh paint covered the walls, flowers bloomed in the front yard, and the rooms carried warmth instead of bitterness. She had poured her energy into giving the house a new life, a life that reflected her strength and resilience. One section of the house was transformed into rental units for single mothers who needed a safe place to start again. Women came with their children, carrying stories of hardship, and Ayanda welcomed them with open arms. The house that once witnessed her pain was now filled with laughter, hope, and second chances. Ayanda herself thrived in ways no one expected. She managed her finances wisely, ran her rentals successfully, and carried herself with quiet confidence that made people respect her even more. Neighbors who once whispered about her humiliation now spoke of her strength. They told her story to others, saying how she turned betrayal into blessing. She became an example to many women who had suffered in silence, showing them that life did not end when someone tried to break you. Chike's name was barely spoken anymore. His downfall had become a lesson, but Ayanda's rise had become an inspiration. Even Mama Nkechi, once proud and cruel, avoided passing by the house, unable to face the woman she had tried to destroy. The community now stood with Ayanda, admiring how she had carried her pain with dignity and turned it into power. One evening, Ayanda stood in the doorway of her home, watching the children of her tenants play in the yard. Their laughter filled the air, and her heart felt at peace. She thought of the stormy night when she had walked away in the rain, broken and humiliated, and how far she had come since then. Turning to the audience, her voice calm and steady, she spoke her final words. Never let anyone throw you out of what you built with your own hands. Your strength is greater than their cruelty, and your silence can become your victory. With those words, she closed the door gently behind her, the same door she had once been locked out of, now hers forever, a symbol of survival, dignity, and triumph. Hi, my loves. Two Hearts, thank you so much for staying with me till the very end of this story. Cherry Blossom, don't forget to like, drop your thoughts in the comments, and hit that subscribe button for more amazing stories. See you next time. Sparkles.